watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael. On a Monday night here, we are going to do a debate review of the Sungenis Mazza debate on the Fatima Consecrations, which took place a few days ago, 3-4 days ago, somewhere around there, and was on the Meaning of Catholic channel. I'll put a link to it here in the description shortly. But joined to do the review, I'm joined here by Kevin Simmons, returning to the show to offer his comments on it, especially since he's an expert on Fatima. So who else to have on than Kevin to comment on Fatima? Kevin, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing okay. Just a different venue. I'm visiting family here down south, so I'm not home in North Dakota.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's awesome. Visiting family for the holidays, right?
Yeah.
That's good.
The only downside is I'm away from all of my books and resources so I've had to pull things together from what I can find and what I remember and what I have locally.
It happens. I know what it's like being separated from the library. Yeah, and that's when you always really need it too, is whenever you're separated from it. So
yeah,
that goes.
It was fun. I was at the airport a week ago today, actually, and somebody texted me and said, "Hey, could you do something for me about it?" And I'm like, "I'm in the airport. I can't."
Oh, that's the way it works. And then when you're home, you don't need them.
Yeah, but the good news is I was able to fulfill the request from this person. So
right. Well, good deal. Well, I'm looking forward to this because I was curious what you thought about the debate because, like I said, I mean, you've clearly spent a lot of time on Fatima. You've written on this subject at length. You've done the Fatima series on this channel, and you've spoken about the consecration before. So let's just start, with your overall general impression, before we dive deep into details. What was your overall impression of the debate?
I thought it was very civil, first of all. I liked how they were very civil, and they obviously have Mazza and Sungenis have their deeply held convictions, it seems. And sometimes zeal and conviction can get the better of people in these discussions. So I really appreciated being able to listen to what struck me as a fairly level-headed discussion with respect to attitude and demeanor.
So
now
go ahead.
I was going to say I don't think that it had the same with respect to the arguments presented, but that's a whole other area for discussion.
Well, what do you think about the topic itself? How important do you think this is? Is this something that's really vital to the body of Christ? Or do you think this is one of those angels dancing on the head of a pin, even though that thesis is actually a little important because it touches on anghelology and all kinds of other issues that do matter? But you know what I mean by that phrase. Do you think that this is something that is really an important thesis to debate, or not really?
Well, I've once read that or heard that a question, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? The answer is all of them, by the way. But I heard that actually never really happened. So, but insofar as it
absolutely
expresses a point,
yeah.
I don't think it's quite to the level of a certain deep theology and whatever else. But as far as looking at questions of the state of the world, where we were at 100 years ago, where we are now 100 years later, I think it still has some merit and stuff with respect to looking at some of the theology that's presented to it, deepening devotion, which is always an ongoing development in church's theology and history and tradition. So there is some merit, but I would say properly understood. There are those who get really crazy and off the wall with these matters, and I say that as charitable as possible. But they get very, very serious about this to the point where they lose charity. And I always remember what St. Augustine said in these matters. He's like,
Mhm.
you can have a discussion and an intelligent one. He said, but if you don't have charity, it's like, you're not going to get anywhere. What's the point of it?
Yeah, I think that's the beginning of De Trinitate, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
it may be. I was thinking.
I
I read it in one of his. I read it in his letters.
Okay.
When I was doing my philosophy thesis, I remember going through the letters. Where he's talking about private revelation. What we today call distinction between public and private revelation and all that. So.
Oh, he was talking. Was he talking specifically about private revelation? I'm just curious. Or you're just lying.
He was talking about in the context of visions.
Okay. Well, that's a different,
how they worked.
Yeah, so that's a different part of Augustine. Then I was thinking of something else then from Augustine.
Yeah,
but it sounds like the same point. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, let's just say, okay, well, there's some utility here to this debate thesis. First of all, let's put our cards on the table. Where exactly do you land when it comes to this one?
On the question of the consecration?
Yeah.
If I'm going to put all my cards out on the table, I think that the 1984 consecration, according to Sister Lucia herself, she stated that it was. She said that this consecration was done by the Holy Father John Paul II in Rome on March 25th, 1984.
Where does she say that?
In her book Como vejo, mensagem. I have the.
And how do we know that's reliable?
Well, that touches upon one of the other thorny areas that comes up during the course of the Mazza Sungenis debate is the question of the fake Lucy hypothesis that's being peddled about, and I choose that word deliberately, peddled about by Dr. Peter Hojnowski. More on that later. But the book is legitimate. It's not falsified to anybody's knowledge. It was written from her pen, so to speak. She said it, and she said it unequivocally. She talks about what Our Lady said, and then she directly states this consecration was done by the Holy Father, et cetera, et cetera. So I can't argue with Sister Lucy.
In this book, it's actually her writing this. It's not somebody saying this. She wrote this, correct?
No, it's her own book, her own writing. Yeah.
Her own book, her own writing. This is a primary source. Gotcha.
Yeah. Do you want to see the picture?
I'd love to see it. Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let me.
You pull it up. So we're talking about a primary source written from her own pen. She's testifying that this is the case. The only way that you can back out of it is say that there was a fake Sister Lucy. Well, I don't know if Dr. Mazza or Dr. Sungenis maintain that thesis. Do you?
No. Mazza, well, they kind of fall on two different lines, and there's a certain hermeneutic that comes with this. If you subscribe to the impostor Lucia theory, which Sungenis seems to entertain, I don't know if I say he's going to subscribe to it specifically necessarily, and let me correct myself, but he certainly seems to entertain it, and the positions that he was adopting during the course of this debate are consistent with somebody who seems to question the identity of Sister Lucia. That's probably the best way to explain it. Mazza, I don't think he accepts that hypothesis. But that was a current that was undercutting that entire debate. Because as it was progressing, I was noticing it a little more and more. I was like, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden, right around the hour time limit, it comes out flat out. And Sungenis is saying how we have to give some stuff to this theory that Hojnowski's putting out there. And I'm just kind of like, okay, that's it. We're done.
Yeah.
But if we can do a screen share, I have the thing pulled up here. Okay. Just let me know whenever we're ready. Or do I have to do it?
You share screen.
Oh, okay. All right, hold on. Let me just. I'm not totally. Screen share is easiest to. Yeah, I don't have two monitors, so the program's telling me to do it with one. No problem. Monitor, so
that's all right. But you gave us the title of the book, so that's sufficient.
Is this it? Is it showing up?
Yeah, let me add it.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay, so all I see is what's coming up on the screen. I don't see like the video or anything, but okay. So there's the Portuguese original, And then there's the English translation. Right now I'm showing the Portuguese original. Como vejo a mensagem, how I see the message. And right, as soon as it wants to load, beginning on page 53, we have this text here towards the bottom. Let's see, if you cut the page right about the beginning where it says Mas vendo a senhora, right there, she's talking about, she's reflecting on Our Lady's words. If they heed my requests, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. But if not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, promoting wars and persecutions of the church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer. Various nations will be annihilated. Now, Sister Lucia, Our Lady's words are in italics. Sister Lucia's comments are in the non-italic. She says a few little things down there, and then she says, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. And then Lucia adds her own words, what the triumph of the Immaculate Heart means. She says, of all these wars promoted in all the world by the errors spread by Russia. So Sister Lucia is interpreting Our Lady to mean that the triumph of the Immaculate Heart is over all the wars promoted throughout the world that were themselves were the result of the spread of Russia's errors. And then she says, the Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, right down at the bottom. And then Lucia's words, the word convert, or will convert, which is from the word conversion, it says that it'll have a change from bad to good, de mal para bem. And then she goes, so she says that the few little words that it means a conversion from something bad to good. Now that's critical. And then Sister Lucia continues on with Our Lady's words, and it will be conceded to the world some time of peace, album tempo de paz, some time or some period of peace. And then Sister Lucia very expressly states here, this promise of peace refers to the wars promoted in all the world by the spreading of the errors of Russia, or the spread of errors by Russia. And then, note, now this is the key sentence right here. Esta congregação foi feita pelo Santo Padre João Paulo II em Roma, publicamente on the 25th of March, 1984, before the image of Our Lady that is venerated in the Chapel of the Apparitions in the Cova de Ira Fatima. So contextually, she's very clear. She's talking about what Our Lady said, and then she expressly states, this consecration was done or made by the Holy Father. There's no arguing this. She equates it, what Our Lady said, with the 1984 consecration.
Now, I missed some parts of the debate. Maybe I didn't hear it. But was this engaged in the debate? Was this directly addressed?
No. This book is basically has gone down the memory hole. You don't find any of the traditionalists, so-called, talking about this. And I'm like, this book is pretty clear. She wrote it in like the 80s or the 90s. It's very, very clear. It was published shortly after her death, but it's hardly ever spoken of, if at all. I think I think Christopher Ferrara might have said something about it once, maybe twice, from what I've seen, but unless I missed something.
But Mazza and Sungenis, neither one of them address this when it's absolutely vital to the debate thesis.
No,
and it's a primary source from the very person that this vision came from.
No, exactly. They don't discuss it.
That's like having a debate on a thesis of the Bible, having never read one word of the Bible.
Pretty much, yeah. And again, the question of the Sister Lucy imposter theory, a hypothesis, Sungenis would just dismiss this because it was written by the fake Sister Lucia, but Mazza, I don't think, subscribes to that, so he might be willing to take a look at this. I'm just going to stop screen sharing here, but Mazza, from what I was hearing in the debate, and I might be wrong, he seems to believe that there were contradictory Lucias between so we'll call pre-Vatican II Lucy and post-Vatican II Lucy, and that we seem to have a lot of contradictions in the post-Vatican II Lucy. Now, that's a thesis that comes a lot from the Francophone world, specifically with Le Contre de Réforme Catholique, with Frère Michel and Frère François at the Abbé Georges de Nantes, which then gets funneled into the Fatima Center literature with Father Nicholas Gruner, and thus your Ferraras, your Father Paul Kramers, even your Kennedy Hall, who was associated with the Fatima Center there. So this whole, as I call it, body of literature has influenced the English-speaking world, and nobody really looks at it critically. And I'm like, I think we need to do that. We need to look at this stuff critically, folks, because otherwise you're in the danger zone of being in an echo chamber. You're just huddled closely with one another, quoting one another, and no one's going outside the sources, of which is, in this case, the sources are yourselves. And that was my big thing that led to kind of my writing the book. I did my book on Fatima, was looking at these sources and saying, I think we need to kind of break through this enclosed circle, enclosed garden that people have created for themselves, and take a fresh, objective look at what the sources have actually said, weighing it against what people like Frère Michel de la Sainte Trinité have said about it, and see if we can't come with some kind of answers, which my book is not the first technically, but it is the first native English book, I think, to do so.
I'm still, forgive me, I'm still a little taken back by the fact that something that is absolutely crucial to this debate thesis wasn't consulted and is a primary source. I'm still a little thrown off by that. So really, what utility do either one of these gentlemen offer on the subject if they haven't read the primary sources? I would like to know your thoughts. Do you think that they have anything to really offer here on this subject? To me, it sounds like no, if you haven't read the primary sources.
No, there were some individual thoughts I thought were kind of, I was kind of like, I hadn't quite seen how somebody could interpret it that way. I may not have agreed with it, but
yeah, let's hear some of those.
Well, I know Sungenis apparently has written a book on the subject. I don't really follow Dr. Sungenis, and I'll be bluntly as to why. He wrote a review of my book on the third part of The Secret of Fatima. It was published by E. Michael Jones, and I think it's Culture Wars, I think is the name of his magazine. And somebody brought it to my attention, and I looked at the review, and right at the beginning of the review of his book, he says, he discredits my book, and he says that in so many words, I don't have it in front of me, but he said something to the effect of how this book is essentially not worth anybody's time, or it's worthless because it's not about the consecration of Russia. And I sat there and I was just like, this is a book on the third part of The Secret of Fatima. It's not on the question of the consecration of Russia. So I don't understand the criticism of this. I'm just going to put this aside and not even bother finishing reading it because it was just so inane. I'm sorry. There's no other word for it. It was a very bad review. And so I just put it in my archive somewhere, and I don't think I've read the whole thing even. I get that his deal is the question of the consecration, but that's not all of Fatima studies. And for him to kind of treat it that way, I think it was, or seemingly treat it that way, I think that was a bit uncalled for. And I realized at that moment I wasn't dealing with a serious person. So I was like, nope, just not even gonna bother with it. So I just put it aside. But so I haven't read his book on the subject. And so what I know is what he said about it from the debate. And one of the things that he had said was when Our Lady appeared in Tui in June of 1929 and said, "The time has come for God, where God requests the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart by the Holy Father, promised and saved by these means." Well, Pius XI was the Holy Father at the time, and he didn't do it. And we had World War II as a result. And so when Pius XII became Pope in 1939, he attempted the consecration in 1942. And Sister Lucia, who continued throughout her life to be favored with other visions or locutions, Jesus said to her that that there. I don't have the exact words in front of me, but Jesus said something to the effect of that the consecration would be honored, but it wasn't going to have it wasn't what heaven wanted. And the reason why was because it failed to have. There were two conditions for the consecration to happen. It had to be done by the Pope and in union. Well, maybe three. Done by the Pope in union or communion with the world's bishops, and it had to be about Russia, or something along the Russia had to be a part of this somehow. So Sister Lucia heard Jesus say that it wasn't what was requested because it failed to meet the criterion of the world's bishops doing this in union with the Holy Father. So Pius XII failed in 1942. But, and this is where Sungenis and I would disagree on this point, but Sungenis pointed out that Jesus' actual words to Sister Lucia, he says everybody's been wrong in how to interpret these words. Jesus said to her that basically renegotiated, that there was going to be a peace and a conversion. And so Jesus renegotiated everything, and we would not have the peace, but we would have the conversion of Russia, or one of the two, something like that. And I said, I don't really agree with that because it presents a kind of different perspective on what conversion actually means. Not to mention, most Fatima scholars interpret that passage of Jesus to Sister Lucia as him meaning that this consecration would be honored, or it would have a salutary effect, but it wouldn't be the complete thing. So World War II would end shorter than what it would have gone on for, but that didn't thereby mean that one half or both of the original request for the consecration was going to be fulfilled. That was a very novel innovation that Sungenis had. I don't agree with it, but that was one thing that I was like, I admit, and I say this, with a little, I was like, I never thought about it that way, but I can start to see why somebody would see that. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, at the end, I think it's Sungenis grasping at straws, because he has to, if he's going to adopt the position, which he seems to have taken, that the imposter Lucia theory is true, then you have to do some Mickey Mousing explanations of things. And since heaven can never lie, you have to explain how the peace and conversion can happen against this backdrop of the fake Lucy thing. So he says the 42 consecration was it. That's what fulfilled heaven, but only after this, the word used in debate was this renegotiating. And another reason why I think that was bunk is because heaven has foresight. This is God we're talking about here, God, omniscient God. Why would God set an impossible standard in 1917, 1929, knowing that it's going to fail, and just get renegotiated anyway? What's the utility here? So Sungenis, to me, presents a theological problem with respect to the omniscience of God, not to mention his omnipotence. We can argue somewhere in there too. So and that's debate. That's a debatable point, and I'm open to different arguments on that. But he does raise some difficulties there, and a supporting theory, which is actually true in the Church's theology of private revelation, is that whenever God appears, or Our Lady appears in an apparition to reveal something through a private revelation, it usually has a local import, be it for the visionary themselves, his or herself, or a group of them, the local area, or maybe a country. And then Sungenis adds, and it's usually something that happens soon. And now, generally speaking, he's correct. Now, he does give a couple of examples, like Quito, Ecuador, where a lady was talking about the 20th century in the 1600s, late 16, early 17, late 1500s, early 1600s. But he says, but that's a much more specific thing. So he theologically he was fairly on point there. But I think he kind of, because he apparently seems to reject the real Lucia thing. He gives the date of 1957 onward is when basically everything from her after that is untrustworthy, which is a whole subject unto itself. The 1957 year, I'd like to get into that if we have time. But because he seems to have adopted some of these positions or is otherwise questioning, he doesn't want to go there because maybe he doesn't want to be wrong. I don't know. He has to do some mental gymnastics, and there are problems that are presented as a result. So,
what what were some maybe insights that you found from Mazza that were maybe you haven't thought of these things in addition to what we've said so far?
I honestly didn't really hear too much from Mazza that was novel or innovative.
Okay.
It was pretty standard boilerplate Fatima Center kind of stuff. At least from what I can recall off the top of my head. And when I say this, I don't mean that derogatorily. I'm just simply stating a fact.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
There are some old tropes that he kind of brings out. Like, for instance, there were evil people conspiring around John Paul II that were trying to stop him from doing the 84 consecration with mentioning Russia by name. He brings out that old trope, and brings out the ghost of Ostpolitik. But what Mazza seems to fail to realize is that Ostpolitik, after the assassination attempt in 1981, John Paul II started realizing this isn't working. It was adopted by John the 23rd, not Pope Pius. I don't remember if it was the 11th or the 12th, as they kind of alleged in the debate. But it was actually more so under John the 23rd. Cardinal Casaroli was also brought up as being involved in Ostpolitik. But John Paul II got smart. He realized early on, and I think it was around the time of the assassination attempt in May of 81, he realized that this isn't going to work. So under him, Ostpolitik was actually starting to go out the window. If you'll pardon the slight reference to Aggiornamento and John the 23rd, they out the window, Yeah. So I don't really think that was a point that I found to be extremely kind of unfair. That was it was a broad paintbrush stroke painted against Ostpolitik, which I don't subscribe to. I think it was a bad idea myself, but we have to still be fair to what history is. And part of the reason why John Paul II realized it after the assassination attempt is in part because he realized he had been warned. It was Edward Cardinal Gagnon, who was not a cardinal at the time, but it was Cardinal Gagnon who warned John Paul II that there was going to be an assassination attempt on him. And John Paul blew him off. And according to Father Murr, who's been here on Reason and Theology, when John Paul II awoke from his coma after his attempt, the first words out of his mouth was he got Jivashover, Cardinal Jivashover, personal secretary, very weakly, and said to him, "Find Gagnon." And well, Gagnon was preaching missions on the Sacred Heart in the middle of Colombia somewhere. They couldn't find him right away, but they eventually found him, and John Paul realized, "Hey, you were right." I can only imagine how that conversation must have gone between Gagnon and JP2. But so quietly, John Paul was adopting his own policy, and it wasn't Ostpolitik. So by the time of the 84 consecration, there were likely people around there, and as a matter of fact, I think there were, that was telling him, don't mention Russia by name, we could have political fallout, But John Paul was not really into Ostpolitik, I don't think, in 1984. He knew the dangers and that it wasn't working. But that's another point for another time, I guess. But
So you mentioned one thing that was extremely crucial to the debate thesis that was not addressed by either debater. Are there any others?
Yeah, they talk about the documents from Sister Lucia, and they say that she was using a computer to type up certain letters. And this is another old trope that goes back many, many years. Okay, I'd like to present something that's fresh and original to reason and theology. If you want to know this stuff, you have to come to watch this episode, if that's okay with you. So forgive me if it's off the cuff, but I'm going to go for it. People have to get what we call the anthropological facts correct when it comes to private revelation. So many people get caught up in the supernatural facts, or they get caught up, they get, bewildered in the eyes over, ooh, there are secrets, but they forget, to the point where they forget that there's the human element. Now, it is true at the time of Our Lady's revelations in 1917 that Sister Lucy did not know how to read or write. She then learned how to read and write when she was studying from 1921 onward. Well, in the 70s or the 80s, she also learned how to work a typewriter. But it was a very particular kind of typewriter. As a matter of fact, here's how this happened with me. I was reading it's in the Carmelites' biography from 2013. They have a note. Now, let me just pull it up here because I have a PDF. The original PDF that was given to me 6 years ago. On page 344 of the first edition English translation, the Carmelites say that, they explain all of this. They say, later on, a friend and benefactor of the community offered Sister Lucia an Olivetti. This machine had memory, which for her was a very nice gift because it could delete without erasing and make as many copies as she wanted. Tenaciously, she learned how to use it despite already being in her 70s, and she did it. So she had this machine, and back in 2017, when I was in Fatima, I went to Coimbra, and I went to the museum there. They had the machine that she used in a display case. You weren't allowed to take photos, but I did. But nobody said nothing. Nobody said anything about having paper and pen. And I happened to have a paper and pencil on me. So right there on the display, they had the stickers, whatever that were on it, that told you what it was. So I wrote it down, and I got back home, and it's an Olivetti ETV 240 typewriter from 1986. And wouldn't you know, there's a video right here on YouTube. Somebody made one back on June 20th, 2013. This is when they updated it, and it's right here on YouTube. I'm going to put a link to it right now in the chat room so people can look it up and see what it used to do for itself. There was no internet back then, so it wasn't hooked up to the internet, and it never was, but it was a very specific type of typewriter. It was electronic, but it wasn't hooked up to the internet. Never was. And there are pictures of her using this machine. It was like a beast of a machine. So it's so she knew how to handwrite, but she also had really bad arthritis. Now, I have growing arthritis in my hands, and I know I'm only 40, but it runs on my mother's side of the family. I find it harder now to hold a pen in my hand sometimes, but it's a lot easier for me to type. That's anecdotal, but that's something that it works for me. I find it easier to type sometimes than to write. So I hope people do visit this link, or people, I can screen share again, and I could show you a little bit of the video here, but it's in the link, and so people can look it up. But so that was the name of it, an Olivetti ETV 240 typewriter. And they walk you through it. I think they even bust it up. They show you what was the inside of it was, how it worked. They were typing up things. I mean, it was really awesome. And I was so glad that those people had done that, because now people can access this and understand the human side to Fatima. So she didn't know how to use a computer sort of a thing. It's bunk. It's bunk. It's like, come on, people, you've got to get with the program here. Like I said to Christopher Ferrara at the Fatima debate 4 years ago, you guys have got to get on board with current scholarship, because you're throwing it out the window. If you continue to throw the scholarship out the window, you're going to continue to be embarrassed before God and the world, because you look like you are woefully unprepared to discuss what everybody else already seems to know, at least in the reputable Fatima communities and scholarships, in what the scholarly world. And I reiterate that again. I reiterate this point again now here in 2021. But unfortunately, we're now 4 years past my original warning, and people look even worse now. They got more egg on their faces. And this comes up even during this debate. When that point came up about the machine, typewriter, computer thing, I just sat there and I shook my head and I'm like, oh my goodness, people, did you not go to the museum? It's right. I know we have COVID, but it's right there in the museum. The machine she used, you can look it up. You can research this stuff. You know, if I wasn't visiting my family, if I was home, I'd pull up. I mean, we even know Sister Lucia's eyeglasses. We even know the number that was on the thing because they were there in the museum in Fatima, not Coimbra, but in Fatima at the time. And I wrote it down. So we even know the number of her eyeglass lenses. This is the kind of basic stuff that we have available. Now that wouldn't have much import to the present debates, but I exaggerate the point in order to make a point. You know. So that was one point that did come up. The other one that came up was a discussion on the Father Fuentes. Sungenis seems to think that everything, or he gave the impression that everything from 1957 onward with Sister Lucia is basically highly suspect, if not outright not reliable. Why the year 1957? Well, there's a very famous, many people call it an interview, but it wasn't really an interview, technically. There was a very famous event that happened in the late 1950s. In December of 1957, the postulator for the causes of Jacinta and Francisco Marto, Father Agustin Fuentes, he was a Mexican priest. He went to visit Sister Lucia in the Carmel of Coimbra, and he spoke to her, and then about Fatima-related matters. Well, Fuentes then turned around, and a few weeks later, or months later, something like that, he was giving a conference to a group of nuns back in Mexico, and he relayed information to them about what had transpired between he and Sister Lucia during that December of 57 meeting. And some of the claims were very sensational, but nobody knew about this in the English-speaking world until there was a lady that knew Father Fuentes, who was bilingual. She translated because Fuentes had written something down in Spanish and published it in a publication, which was his own publication. I found out during my studies, but she translated this into English, and it was published in English in a publication called Fatima Findings by Father Ryan, who I think he was a Jesuit, I want to say, but Father Ryan in 1958 or 59, I want to say. Well, long story short, that interview went around the world because there were so many incredible statements, like very sensational stuff about all kinds of things that were going to happen. The devil had asked for a period of time the devil was in a decisive battle in the move for a decisive battle against the Virgin. Hence, from now on, we must all choose sides. Either we are for God or we are for the devil. There is no middle ground, Father. Very sensational claims. And it got over to Portugal, and Sister Lucia brought it, and she denounced it. She said that's not what took place. And they say the lie gets around the world fast, and the truth has time to get its boots on. Well, that story went around flying faster than her denial could be. And a lot of people in the traditionalist camp of things after Vatican II interpreted this as the last interview of the true Sister Lucia and stuff like that. It really took on a legend all of its own. So what I did for my book, and this is chapter 5, and chapter 5 is very, very detailed. If you're not interested in a scientific examination of the facts, chapter 5 is going to put you to sleep. But let me put it very, very clear what I said in chapter 5. This whole rhetoric and this whole hype that people have created about the Fuentes interview, so-called, is actually not only inappropriate, it's likely based upon a mistranslation. what happened was Fuentes spoke, and he wrote this down in Spanish, and it was published in a publication, and forgive my Spanish, I think it's Hacia los Altares, which translates into English as To the Heights. And that was Father Fuentes' own publication. It was like his own little cottage industry, if you will. And I don't mean that derogatorily, but it was his own publication because he was involved with another canonization process. And the lady that translated it into English, she took many liberties, I found out. And the English text that was published in Fatima Findings was brought over to Portugal. I don't know how, but it gained attention over in Portugal. And just today, as a matter of fact, I learned the full name of the person who did this. There's a publication in Portugal called A Voz, which means the voice. And it was translated from the English, which itself was already a translation, but it was translated from English into Portuguese by a guy named Nuno Manuel Maria Calpas de Braganza, or just MC de Braganza for short. And I only just today, 5-6 hours ago, found out the full name of this gentleman. So now I can do more research on him. Having said that, Braganza only dealt with the text that was in front of him. He didn't consult the Spanish original when he made his own translation. So now the Portuguese text is flying around Portugal, and it was only after that that Sister Lucia denounces this interview with Father Fuentes. So once I went back and looked at everything, and I said, "Oh my goodness, wait a minute, hold the phone. We have a problem. The English translation is flawed, horribly so, I might add." I then had the golden question in front of me. What text was shown Sister Lucia? The flawed Portuguese translation based upon the flawed English translation? Or was she shown the original Spanish? Maybe in Portuguese translation, I don't know. What text got to Sister Lucia? If she condemned the Portuguese translation, then yeah, it actually all makes total sense. She wouldn't have been forced or coerced or anything. She could have denounced it all because it actually really wasn't what Fuentes said in the Spanish original. So like I said, all of the details are in chapter 5 for those with more scientific mind. But the ghost of this comes up. And as I'm sitting there during the Mazza Sungenis debate, and as I'm sitting there listening to this, I'm like, okay, I have no idea if Mazza has read my book, but Sungenis claims to have read it. He should have known better. He should have known better. So the fact that he didn't tells me that when he brings up the ghost of Fuentes, that tells me that he either just didn't want to get into it because it really wasn't entirely totally relevant to the topic of their debate, which is fair. That's a proper. I could accept that, or he rejected what I did, or just forgot about it. But either which way, Fuentes continues in traditionalist circles, especially, to be talked about as he has been characterized by the Contre-Réforme Catholique for 40 years now. I think we're up to now, going on 40 years, 50 years now. And nobody is looking at this and going, wait a minute, maybe we need to go back. Because if there are contradictions between pre and post Vatican II Lucia, they're trying to they're enlarging the conspiracy in order to fit the blasted narrative instead of looking at the actual facts. You know, in other words, in this case, they want to blame everything on a simple answer, which is a fake Lucy. At least some people want to think that. And it's nonsense. It's nonsense. I was in the chat room during that debate, and I made a comment, and Dr. Flanders, I think it's Dr. Flanders. Yeah, he is a doctor, right? Dr. Tim Flanders. No, okay. Tim Flanders puts it up, highlights it on the screen, and I sat there and I was just like, I'm going to remember you did that, Flanders. He puts it up, and what I pointed out was I said how this whole imposter Lucia theory is like it's insane. Her relatives, okay, go to see her, and none of them have ever said that that's not my aunt. At about the hour mark, Sungenis, let me pull up my notes here. Sungenis actually addresses this. I wrote in my notes, around the 1 hour mark, Sungenis employs language that casts doubt upon whether Lucia was meeting with her relatives. He uses the word purported and says that it is not eyewitness testimony in a court of law. He then focuses his discussion upon the forensic evidence and Dr. Peter Hornowski's work on this matter with the facial reconstruction technology, whatever it is. Now, when Sungenis did that, I sat there and I was just like, oh, you're done. You're done. Okay. I want to show you something. I have another thing for screen sharing here.
While you're doing that, let me just compliment you, because I love how you hear these crazy, wild-eyed conspiracy theories on Fatima, and all you do is you just simply offer very, very basic yet undeniable evidence to the contrary, such as, well, her family doesn't say that she's an imposter, or, well, Sister Lucia herself said that the consecration was done. It's a little bit funny to me that
it's all very clear to me. We try to be charitable, but can I be perfectly blunt?
Yeah, go ahead and be candid at this point, because I think that it's pretty absurd when you have to say basic things like, well, her family doesn't say that this is an imposter. When we get to that level, yeah.
I respect Mazza. He came across as a very dignified individual. He seemed to have a fairly level head. We may have respectful disagreements, but I feel as though I can have an honest conversation with him. I do not believe I could have an honest conversation with Dr. Robert Sungenis. I just don't. Because once you go off into the middle of La La Land of a fake Sister Lucia theory, there's no intelligible, rational argument to be had with that. By that point, you're shoveling stuff against the tide. And I know I can't have an honest conversation. And I'm like, you people are so, quite frankly, backwards at this point. You're so far regressed into insanity that you're not even at the level where everybody else of the world is at with respect to Fatimology.
You were saying that Sungenis doesn't necessarily endorse the imposter Lucy. He was just entertaining it, I guess.
Well, I say that in order to couch my terms to be careful. He did not flat out state during the debate, I subscribe to this.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to be charitable and give him the benefit of the doubt. But the positions and some of the things that he says is consistent with somebody who at least wants to hold a mental reservation, if you will.
Yeah, it was at least entertaining it. Okay.
Yeah. So is this book page coming up here on your screen? Is it screen sharing? Okay. All right. What you are looking at here is a book by Italian journalists Roberto and Lorenzo Allegri. They wrote a book, it was translated in English, called Fatima, the Story Behind the Miracles. These guys, okay, the Allegris, they had a guided tour around the places of Fatima by the nephew of Sister Lucia, Father Jose Valigno. He's a Salesian priest, I believe. I don't know. I haven't heard that he died yet, but he was one of those that Sister Lucia had even written one of the famous letters in the late 60s, early 70s to him about the state of affairs in the church and in the world. But I bring up the Italian because I don't have the English, ironically. I only have this Italian text in front of me. The English is back home. But I know enough of Italian where I can translate it off the top of my head and give you the sense of what's being said here. So they're being given this guided tour. And at the time of the tour, the brother of Jacinta and Francisco Marto, Joao Marto, was still alive and walking the earth. He was a very old man. And matter of fact, he died shortly after they all met and talked. But Father Jose and Joao Marto, they're sitting there and they're talking in the old Portuguese dialect and they're having a ball, Now, Father Valigno is, he lets them know that he's actually going to be going to visit Sister Lucia. And this takes us to page 196 of the Italian text of this book that I'm talking about by Lorenzo and Roberto Allegri. And I think I should probably blow it up so everybody can see it better. If people see where it says here, quindi padre non è proprio possibile parlare con sua Lucia, if right here about the middle of the page. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but beginning there, I'll give a rough translation, not word for word, but they're saying, "Then, Father, it is not possible to speak with Sister Lucia," and he responds, "Impossible, unless one has obtained the written permission from the Pope, il permesso scritto del Papa." And then the Allegri say, "Lei però può andare a trovarla, but you're going to go see her. You're going to go speak to her." And then he says, "Yes, I can. The Holy See has permitted all of the direct nephews to go and speak to her 2-3 times a year. For me," he says, "I am a priest, or because I am a priest, he can go, if I'm reading this correctly, una volta al mese. He can go once a month, and also other times too." This is the nephew, a priest, who is going to see his aunt. And as the book progresses, they actually do get to Coimbra. And he goes in, and the Allegri, because the Allegris had to stay outside, they couldn't go in. They go outside, and then he comes out, and they're like, "Hey, how's it going? Blah, blah. What happened in there?" And they're talking about, and that comes a little bit later in the book. This is a real book. You could open it up, written by the nephew who knew her around the time of her entrance to the Carmel of Coimbra, if I remember my biographical facts correctly. Not a single one of them have ever said, "That's not my aunt." I would think that'd be a pretty important piece of this mysterious puzzle if you're going to try to improve an imposter Lucia. However, Sungenis' response to this was, he then says that he's like, when Flanders brought this point about the relatives, prompted by me in a comment in the chat, he just dismisses it. He just completely downplays it and says that that's not reliable testimony in a court of law. I'm not a lawyer. As far as I know, I don't think you have legal training either, but I do know lawyers, and I will contact them, and I'm going to ask them about this, but I don't see why, if you're trying to establish the proof in a court of law of who somebody is, if they have living relatives that knew them for decades, why wouldn't you bring them in a court of law and verify this? I mean, my brother, God rest his soul, died 9 months ago, okay? I didn't know if, when I went to Massachusetts, I had to ask the question, do I have to go to the morgue and identify his body? I mean, do I have to do that? Not because I didn't want to, but because it's just like, that would be horrible. I was already grieving his death, and I have to go and identify the body. I would have lost it. And for the record, when I did see him for the first time in the funeral home, I collapsed to the floor. So I don't really think we can dismiss family testimony out of hand like that. I think that's wrong. But Sungenis had to do that because that is a notable gaping hole in this Sister Lucy theory, and it's one of the reasons why I continue to drive that point home in this imposter Lucia nonsense, because it's kind of the Achilles heel in some senses. They've always acted like it was her, and the only way that you can attempt to get past that, this little Achilles heel, is to cover up one conspiracy with another one, which is, oh, they must be threatened by the mafia or the dark, evil people at the Vatican who are behind Ostpolitik, or whatever other crazy nonsense that people are going to come up with in order to rationalize in their own minds the absolutely irrational and indefensible. The Lucia that entered the Carmel of Coimbra in 1948, the same one who spoke with Father Fuentes, is the same one who died in 2005. People have just got to stop enlarging these conspiracies in order to fit the blasted narrative. Instead of doing that, though, they have to maintain the narrative at all times. The narrative über alles, if you will. Forgive if I mispronounce the German. The narrative.
And the narrative is crucial because it's their coping mechanism to deal with the crisis in the church. It's their safety blanket. If you take that away, they don't have any way to cope with, well, how can I still be Catholic and make sense of this crisis? Without this theory, I don't have anything. So
yeah, a lot of it goes back to Vatican II. and Vatican II must be blamed for everything to certain people's minds. Now, as I have said before, we can have a charitable, honest, intelligent discussion about the highs and lows, the roses and thorns of Vatican II. But trying to blame every ill on the Catholic Church, going on in the Catholic Church, on the Second Vatican Council, I don't think that there's any sane scholar in the world that's going to sit there and adopt that thesis. It's indefensible. But because people have to trace everything back to Vatican II, at least some people have to trace it back to Vatican II, and just blame it on the Vatican II, bad council, do over, let's wheel back the hands of time. This is the constant trope, I'll call it, that we keep going back to. And if that is destroyed, then the whole crux of many of these traditionalist arguments, including those with Fatima, just completely go kaput.
Do you mean to tell me the random email that I got from a random person that I don't know the other day telling me that it's Vatican II that is to blame for all of the problems today in the church? Do you mean to tell me that's not true?
I didn't see the email, but
I know. I just
no, I don't. I can't blame Vatican II. I have to blame. I mean, there's a lot of other blame to go around. Bad bishops, bad priests, bad lay people. It was Saint Bernadette Subaru, who, in an interview not terribly long before she died, she was asked by the interviewer about an encroaching army upon Paris, and he was like, "Do you fear that this?" And she goes, "No." And he's like, "Did Our Lady ever say anything about this army in Paris?" "No." And he's like, "Well, what then do you fear?" She looked at him, and it's in my book in the Prayer of St. Michael, the citation to this. She looks at him and then goes, "Mauvais catholique," bad Catholics. Bad Catholics. If Catholics are meant to be the leaven of the world, and if we're not doing our job, well, then there's a lot of blame to go around. It's not just Vatican II. I think that there were certain elements in the church and in the world that, like I said earlier, lies flew around the hemisphere faster than the truth can get its boots on. Now, again, I think there are some things that Vatican II decided to do that were questionable. But we have to go about these things intelligently, and not just try to put it squarely at the feet of this one thing, and then that's it. That's not the way it works either. And I'm trying to think. I think that I thought there was something else. But the definitive moment where I knew that this debate between Mazza and Sungenis was over, and it was essentially almost Mazza's win after that, was at around the 37-minute and 30-second mark of the video. Sungenis made a jaw-dropping admission. He says that he's never even heard of Blessed Alexandrina da Costa. And if you watch Mazza's reaction on it, he's just you can just see the look on his face. He's kind of like, we're having this discussion on the question of the consecration, and you don't even know who she is. Blessed Alexandrina da Costa, note she's blessed. She was a Portuguese mystic, and this language of consecrating the world versus consecrating Russia, the consecration of the world was something that came from her. And this is a big thing, because when John Paul consecrated the world in 1984, Russia was not mentioned out loud verbally. So there's a big debate there, and a lot of this discussion goes back to what she said and what she claimed that Jesus had told her. So how somebody like Robert Sungenis could write a book about the consecration of Fatima and not know about Alexandrina da Costa, I was like, right then and there, I put in the chat room before the comment was removed. I was like, that's it. He's done. He just lost. And here was the moment where Sungenis just lost this debate, because it showed he wasn't serious.
The comment was removed?
Yes, I removed it.
Oh, okay. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. I was removing my chats throughout, because I don't like having things up there all the time. I just I remove things after people see it and like somebody responds, that kind of thing. It's just a general habit of mine. So, but I had posted at the time, and that's the moment where Sungenis just lost this debate. If you don't even know who Alexandrina da Costa is, and granted, I don't have encyclopedic knowledge on this woman, but if you go to Fatima, there are books about her in the bookshops. If you have friends in Fatima, like I do, they'll talk to you about her. and willingly and openly and very excitedly so, may I add. I could even refer people to, I can't right now, but I can refer people to one gentleman in particular who will sit there and give you encyclopedia knowledge on all things Fatima. But I'm like, how could you not know this? How do you not know this? And I'm like, you're not serious, Sungenis. You're not serious. So I am not really going to believe a word you say on any of this because you apparently have not done your homework. And I'm sorry, but I know that sounds horribly rude and dismissive and judgmental. But that was the moment where he lost the debate, was when he openly, and he wasn't even being sarcastic. He actually said that he said something to the effect of, he's like, Dr. Mazza, he's like, why do you keep bringing up this Alexandrina de Costa? He's like, I don't even know who she is. I mean, it was pretty unequivocal. My jaw, I wish I had a camera on me at the time. My jaw just dropped. And I'm like, how do you not know who she is? And you're going to debate this topic? Like, I was like, at that point, I was just like, no, I could have shut it off because I already knew Mazza would have won it after that. So at the end, I get the impression we have to get going here. So I'll just simply say, wrapping up, I think Dr. Mazza, he had the higher argument, still very flawed, but because I think at the end of the day, he had the higher argument, I think he walked away the victor. But I think that, I say that with some qualifications and nuance, of course, but I think at the end, he came out the better of the two.
Speaking of nuances, to all those nuancers out there watching the show, if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do it. Make sure to hit that like button. And Kevin, go ahead and put in a plug for anything that you're working on, by the way.
Well, actually, we were getting ready for, we're working on a project for my work, and I was looking at some new Fatima stuff, so there might be a new article coming out about that pretty soon, actually, on the particular healing of that was alleged to have a question of a healing, and something that Our Lady reputed to Our Lady. So that I'm thinking I might turn that into an actual article. So everybody stay tuned. And I do have, I just published the other day, before I even heard about this debate between Mazza and Sungenis, I had put here in the chat room. I just published something on some reflections on Russia will be converted and what that means. Included in this is mention of this paragraph that we saw earlier from Como Vejo and Mensagem. Just kind of reflecting on what does it mean Russia will be converted. I said towards the beginning of the podcast today that the meaning of conversion has to be properly understood. And so these are some reflections, not definitive answers, but some reflections to kind of get people to start rethinking what some of this means. Our Lady very clearly, according to Sister Lucia, was talking about not a conversion from Russian Orthodoxy and everybody becomes Roman Catholic, but she very clearly meant that she would convert from bad to good, meaning she would stop these wars and everything else based upon atheistic communism. And we've kind of seen that now. So there's some question there about how we can look at these things and discuss, but we have to have these discussions. We need to know what was said, how it was meant, and understand our terms. And the only way to do that, ironically enough, is to look to the great tradition and of Christian history and theology to help us refine and understand these terms better. And so this one article is something that I'm hoping people will be able to look at. And then lastly, a week from today, my Bella Dodd article that we talked about in another program, I did some minor revisions to it, and it will be published by Homiletic and Pastoral Review a week from today, I'm happy to say. So if people want to just kind of keep their eye on that, it'll be check out over there, and that's a whole other conversation. Bella Dodd.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing this, Kevin. I really appreciate it. Very helpful content.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. So always good to be with you.
Yeah, I look forward to having you back on. Everybody, again, thank y'all for watching. Like I said before, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support what we're doing here.